All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Expero webinar on its components all the way down, talking about how we modernize the financial desktop. I'm Sebastian. I'm one of the founders of Expero. My background is in technology, so I'll be talking a little bit about how we modernize and use components from a technical perspective. And my co-founder, Lynn, is on with us. Hi, Lynn.
Hey, Sebastian. I'm Lynn Pozick. I'm a co-founder of Expero, and my background is product and UX, and I'll be talking about a little bit about product strategy and a little bit about user experience and the role that those play in modernization.
So first, a little word on who Expero is for people who aren't familiar with us. We are a company that helps people build products for expert users. Everything from software development to machine learning, data analytics, and in some areas, which we won't focus on today, we have some proprietary assets to help, especially around fighting financial crimes, anti-money laundering and such. So we work in a number of industries, but we have a strong specialization in finance. We've worked on a number of kinds of projects ranging from building entirely new products from the ground up to legacy system modernization. A lot of software in our industry has been around a long time and proven its value, but is now harder to work with or on technology stacks that are retiring. There's a huge wave of new digitization and modernization that we participate in. We do a lot of work around data integration and analytics. And in fact, some of that analytics and data integration has led directly to some of the work, which again, we're not going to cover today, but that we've worked with a couple of big US banks now with software to help them fight financial crimes and investigate crimes like money laundering. We worked in a lot of places in the industry. We'd love for you to call some of our references. We're proud partners of OpenFi, who's a big participant in this desktop modernization tornado sweeping through the industry. Everything from front office to back office, portfolio analytics, lots of different income classes, all through capital markets. And you know, it's the nature of this sort of work that a lot of it is done for companies by users inside those companies, and it's not kosher for us to share, but we have done some work that's publicly visible and referenceable. One is a treasury trading system called OpenDoor, built about 5 years ago to help trade off the run US Treasuries and tips. We built that entire platform with our partners over at Broadway, who did some of the back-end market ticks and clearing, and some pretty interesting portfolio management and analytics work over at Virtus, which is now part of FIS for CLOs. So encourage you to reach out to us and talk a little bit about the kinds of work we've done and see if it's similar to what you do. Today, we're going to talk about a few broad themes that we see in our work modernizing the desktop. Cooperate to compete, which is kind of the whole basis of this component conversation. How, if I've decided to use components and modernize my suites, do I even start? A lot of people struggle with kind of getting off the ground. And then Lynn's going to talk about a couple topics around UX, how to don't build a better chore factory, and what modern expectations are when we're looking at what a new user experience looks like. And then I'll wrap up talking a little bit about how components are more than just a UX topic. They're also a technology topic. Background on the firm. We do a lot of the product strategy and UX and architecture design you're going to see today, but we also do a lot of implementation work as well. So let's start with cooperating to compete. Here's the modern capital markets desktop. It's full of stuff. In fact, there's usually lots of monitors. Even people that have had to work from home because of COVID have sweet talked their way into multiple monitors. This is a business that consumes a lot of data. And it's a multi-vendor desktop. There's a lot of tools you use day to day for pre-trade intelligence or clearing or data or messaging or chat. And here's you with your legacy app trying to stand out. What does it mean now that you're on this much bigger, much more democratized desktop? One of our customers said, you know, I run a big portfolio management suite, and I understand that my OMS built into that suite may work well for one class of customers, but it may not work for another class of customers. I can't give up, let's say, FX customers just because I recognize at the current moment my FX OMS is subpar or maybe hasn't been implemented, even if my portfolio management can understand currency positions and trades. So I need to be able to cooperate with some best-in-breed FX OMS if I'm to compete with my core value proposition portfolio management. And we're seeing this in a lot of different places. For instance, about a month ago, FactSet, well-known big data terminal, announced that they were integrating with Microsoft Teams. When I first saw this, I thought, well, that's kind of a weird gimmick. What does that even mean? And then I kind of realized, actually, this is really interesting, because how many of us in building our applications for sophisticated experts have ended up sketching our way into a whole notifications, alerts, sharing, and chat workflow for something in our application, when in real life, those things are happening on Slack, Teams, email, and such. And so this is a case of FactSet recognizing, aha, there are components optimized for information sharing, cooperation, alerting, and notifications. We don't necessarily have to build those all ourselves. What if we cooperate with Teams in order to compete with, let's say, Bloomberg Chat? Another example that we see from a company we do a fair amount of advisory work for, OpenFin, they build a set of UI components, kind of an operating system for the finance desktop. They recently released a notifications center. Now, you can't do anything with OpenFin by itself. It's a container for all the applications we're building, but they recognized, as I was just mentioning, all these applications implementing notifications and alerts over and over and over again. And maybe some of them are great workflows, but now that busy finance user with 10 different vendors' applications on her desktop is dealing with 10 different notifications flows. And at the end of the day, just as Windows and Mac OS did for us, unifying those notifications into a common place so that that person can get her job done across multiple intelligence, trade, position applications, just makes everyone better. So you cooperate with OpenFin in order to compete on the desktop. Maybe the best example of all, my favorite one, is the most famous component on the finance desktop. Yes, that's called Excel. Another customer of ours, Rockport, builds some really sophisticated commercial real estate loan underwriting applications. And it's non-trivial to price a skyscraper. You have large tenant lists, you have ratings, you have credit ratings and loan values and all the sort of things you expect in a credit analysis. And yes, Rockport supplies the bones of that analysis and allows you to compare it across multiple properties and all the things you'd expect of a sophisticated software solution. But they've also admitted, in fact, taken advantage of the fact that if you're underwriting the purchase of a large office building, you're going to have a big complicated Excel model to account for all the things that aren't in Rockport's base model, so that you can convert some of the things that make your deal special into the things that make it more comparable across property types, for instance. And so they have, instead of imagining that they need to displace Excel and implement a million features on their website that compete with all the properties and sizing and inputs and formulas available in Excel, they've just shipped Excel to the users with a plugin and a data model and said, knock yourselves out, make sure when you're done, the data's here and we'll take with it and run. Which I think is a really smart approach and something that we're seeing more and more often as we're asked to help modernize applications and deliver them through browsers or OpenFin or desktop apps. The integrations with Excel itself are becoming more and more sophisticated, just recognizing what it's so good at. So the way I sum this up is, we should, as we modernize our applications, expect to take them all apart into their constituent pieces. And Lynn's going to talk about what a lot of those patterns are that we break it into, and then let your users put it back together again. If they want to be in Teams or Excel or their own OMS, let them cooperate with those pieces so that their workflow is as productive as possible and you're able to compete where you're best. And by the way, they were already doing this, right? It's not like they didn't open up Excel. You just weren't making it easy for them. They were having to extract data from your reports and paste them in, or they were armchair typing, swiveling, typing in the data. So a lot of what we see in modern expectations is cooperating with that desire to componentize and just take the pieces I want to build the workflow I want. And from a business perspective, what this kind of means is be aware of where you're best of breed and where you have a strong competitive advantage, such as in that Rockport example, your comparables, your underlying loan modeling, but then share with the components that are better than you, namely Excel for building arbitrarily complex financial models. It's that kind of awareness that helps you prioritize and understand how you can approach your monetization story. So Let's imagine that you've decided, great, that sounds fantastic. Let's start our modernization effort. We think there's an important way to look at that effort to avoid getting stuck, because it can often be overwhelming thinking about where to begin. We look at product building, frankly, for new products, but especially for modernization, as a multidisciplinary affair. Product strategy, technology and data, and user experience design all need to inform your program. And quite frankly, the most typical symptom we see of focusing purely on one of these is that you get stuck, you get nonplussed, you don't know where to start. You've got a technologist who's maybe saying, gosh, this architecture is ancient. If we only upgraded it to A, B, C and magical unicorns, X, Y, and Z, then it would be amazing. That may be true, and that person is probably smart, but how does that actually affect your product strategy? Is that an improvement to your best of breed capabilities, or is that actually a problem that's affecting your place on that desktop? Product strategy, oh, if only we could attack new market X. Great. Endless numbers of cool prototypes that show sex appeal, but don't actually prove that you can solve the problem with the data that you've got or with the users that you need to sell to. And user experience design, rearranging all the buttons and making something much easier and smoother to use doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sell more copies of it or compete with the next guy over who has a fundamentally better value proposition. So we often see people stuck by just focusing on one of these, and we think it's really important to look at all of them. Frankly, you need a multidisciplinary team to help you get off the ground. And my favorite element to look at once you even have that multidisciplinary team on the ground is the product strategy angle, meaning we so often see that a project is really big, right? We wouldn't be called on to help modernize a product. We wouldn't spend the money to modernize a product if it wasn't already valuable, if it wasn't already in the marketplace, already doing a lot, which means it's already pretty big. Our favorite cheat is to try to not do all of it at once. In other words, when we look at this suggestion to like break your desktop apart and put it back together, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to take all of it and fix it all at once to start achieving value. A typical encounter we have is, hello, new company, or new client, we're here to help you modernize your application. Client says, wow, there are 9 of these things. They're each interesting. They're all tangled together. We've been sitting thinking about it for 6 months, trying to figure out what to do. And we have little isolated POCs, and it just seems so big. Do we just need to hire 30 people and do it? And what we say is, let's put a product management mindset on it. Let's look at this, where it is in the market, the cooperate to compete, the be best of breed or share, and say, of those tools or of the functionality that those tools surface, where are you a leader? Where are you content to follow? Where, frankly, do you not need to compete anymore because someone else is already in that space or it's an obsolete workflow? Where are you happy to sort of coast along with where you are? Be honest about it, and you'll probably end up with a matrix like this that says something like I referred to earlier. Oh yeah, maybe I don't need to have the best FX OMS in order to compete here. What I do need is better multi-fund analysis, right? That's where I can really be a leader. And now all of a sudden, instead of 9 things in a thicket, I've got 3 to rewrite, 3 to retire, 3 to improve. What often happens next is that when I attack it from a user understanding and user experience perspective, I discover that the way people use the tools now is not the way that they used them when they were first written. There'll be a lot of reasons for that. And these arrows are an attempt to illustrate that, meaning 3 different personas, blue, green, and purple in this picture, I suppose, may use those applications in different combinations, which then suggests us, maybe out of this big thicket, I've got 3 things I can retire completely. And in fact, I'm going to kind of rearrange the experience to just build 3 new products. This is purely hypothetical. You can imagine your particulars in this case, but we see this sort of untangling over and over again where it seems absolutely daunting. But when you break it down, okay, if we achieve a componentized, rearrangeable workflow, adhering to modern patterns where users can be more in control of their own experience, we can actually really simplify the pieces that we need to expose to them, and some of this messiness gets a little untangled. So with that overview of sort of why we think components matter from a product and business perspective, I want to invite Lynn to talk about what that really looks like when it gets down to actually the pieces the users touch.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for that great background, Sebastian. So the next thing we want to talk about is it's kind of another way people get stuck. Sometimes we refer to it as creating a modern chore factory. If you can go to the next slide. Uh, you know, it's very easy to get mired in all the technology when you're getting in there and you're trying to modernize your system, multiple systems together, and you can get kind of hyper focused on some of the individual piece parts and lose sight of the bigger picture pretty easily, and when that happens, often we have these shiny new UIs that really maybe haven't made they look better, and there's some things that are better. Maybe they're more conventional and expected, but they really still don't help the user, maybe in the grander scheme of things. So, like if I'm a portfolio manager and I'm looking for a particular thing, maybe that's changed in my portfolio, or I'm looking to increase overall performance and looking for best ways to do that. At the end of the day, just having a better grid. And we chose grid here because it's sort of the heavy lifter in the financial sector, right? Everybody has a grid and 20 different flavors of it, whether it's in Excel or in their UI. Uh, at the end of the day, does that really help them to maybe a little bit? Um, but it's more often we will create additional clicks, additional steps in a slicker looking UI. Maybe instead of 10 clicks, maybe now they have 8, but we really haven't gotten to the meat of what's going to help them. So let me show you an example of that in the next slide. So imagine, if you will, you were a portfolio manager, and you're looking at your portfolio, and good news, you have a super fast new data grid, and you can sort and sift and filter in lots of different ways. And so as a portfolio manager, I'm interested in maybe understanding what ratings have changes. So maybe I'm managing some bonds or assets that are predicated on some ratings. And I want to understand what's changed that might trigger my need to rebalance my portfolio, right? And so I can get in there, and now much faster I can sort and filter and do all the things. But at the end of the day, that new super fast grid that we're invested in kind of lost sight of the bigger picture, right? So what would be better? And one of the reasons, you can get the next slide, one of the reasons we like the component-based approach so much, as Sebastian said, think of it as taking what you have apart, keeping what's good, and then letting the user inform how it gets put back together. So in the case of our portfolio manager, what would probably be really helpful is being able to see something like a notification. Sebastian mentioned earlier, like more aggregate notifications across my portfolios, right? So maybe there's a component for that there's a certain trigger on ratings, and it's going to alert me when something has changed across all of my holdings, right? Out of all of that, I don't need to sort, sift, filter faster. What I need is something that's really going to tell me what I need to know and when I need to know it, and not create extra steps for me. So and in the long run, that slick grid maybe didn't help me very much. Similarly, we have a couple of other examples here where, bringing to the user's attention from other contexts. So there's an alert icon there. In this particular context, that could be for the portfolio manager, that could be bringing to attention and alert something like, maybe this has fallen out of compliance. And right there, when they're working on looking at their portfolio, they don't have to go into compliance. They can see the information right there, right where they need it. Now, yeah, the best way to do this, go ahead to the next slide. The best way to do this sort of approach, when you want to move to a component-based approach and you want to take things apart, that means we really, if we're going to put them back together in a meaningful way, that means we have to be joined at the hip with our users and learning, from them and getting that feedback. But we also really need to make an effort to shift our mindset to think more like our users, right? So we as engineers, we think a lot about the data models and the logic and the individual components we're building and how do we make that grid faster, right? But the user thinks about, well, I have these things I need to achieve. I need to better understand when I need to rebalance. I need to better understand my cash position. And just let me just reach in and show me the data that I need to see at any given time, right? For that. Very different. Engineers and ultimate end users think very differently about the way that software should work. So this is one of the things we tell our clients quite often is you really have to shift your mindset, particularly with the components. Sort of when with great power comes great responsibility, when there will invariably be some experience the users get out of the box and some amount to customize that initial experience that they have. Let's try to think a little bit more like our users, and what are the bigger picture things that we should be enabling, that they really need to be able to solve. Now we want to get into some examples of a few components and some different kind of patterns that we commonly see when you move to more of a component-based approach. So to give you a context here, this is Sebastian showed a couple of images earlier. So if we zoom out from that grid we were looking at in the notifications, maybe we have a few more things now on our desktop, right? So the desktop can be very chaotic. They have a lot going on besides the software, that your institution may have produced for them, or third-party software, or if you're a software company that you're selling to them, right? There is a lot going on. So when you talk about composable UIs and giving the user the power to decide, it's all about how do we enable that? So how do we enable that level of interoperability, and how do we enable that level of customization to put the power in the hands of the end user? So let's look at it quickly here in the context. So if we think of this, your mileage might vary, but basic ecosystem where we have front office, middle office, back office, and we have lots of different processes and lots of different technology and lots of different data that makes each of those areas of the finance hum. So let's suppose now our portfolio manager comes to the table with a simple question. Well, what's my cash position? How do I find that out? Well, wouldn't it be nice if there was an easy way to tell me what my cash position was? And even ballpark me on that, where I don't have to pull reports from 10 different places and dig in on reconciliation and really track exactly where things are in the settlement process. So what if we could, can you highlight there we go. So now what if we're able to answer that question with the things across the front, middle, and back office ecosystem in an integrated way, right? And Sebastian had mentioned earlier, we've got a little example here. OpenFin is one of our partners that great technology, if you're not familiar with it, for enabling interoperability between legacy and modern web-based architecture systems, among other things. But when the user wants to answer this question and we want to put the power in their hands, what we really need to do is we need to democratize the trading, the trade processing, the cash management, the cash reconciliation, right, across the enterprise in order to, drumroll please, have a component that might look something like this, right? So now the user, there's a lot more in here than just cash position, but if we can grab those things and allow the user to grab those things and say, I want to see these things, I want to know in one shot, generally, how much buying power do I have? How much cash do I have available, right? Now we're thinking like the user and the questions that they bring to the table, not you have a better data grid or you have a better dashboard, but oops, it doesn't quite show you everything that you really need to know on a daily basis to be able to do your job better, to have better performing portfolios, to have more money at play in the market, right? And these are the kinds of things that you need to think about whenever you're thinking about modernization. It's not just finding the next best data grid control or getting off that sunsetting technology. It's also thinking about how to put the power in the hands of your end users.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because like that trading, trade processing, cash management, cash reconciliation are all probably big, interesting, complicated applications with a lot of experts and processes, moving around them. Just because you took them apart and put them back together and made them easier to use, that's fine inside. But this now, by thinking about these as components, you create opportunities that didn't exist before. It's now easier if they expose their UI and their data, which I'll talk about in a minute, to create some of these new views rather than gift your users that chore factory. If go find it, good luck. Here's Excel.
It's in there.
It creates lots of new opportunities. The composition itself is one of the products.
And we're going to look at a couple of examples. Now, there's tons of patterns. I mean, we could talk all day about this. We just pulled a couple here today that are some of the more common ones when you're getting started with this more component-based approach, this more composable approach. So let's look at a couple of these now. So one of the first things at a paradigm level to understand is that we need a way of organizing all of these components, right? So we mentioned the desktop, very chaotic already, right? So whether that's across different pieces of technology that you're going to allow users to bring together, or maybe it's just across, things you've built in your institution, talking your legacy systems and your modern systems, however it is those things are going to operate and talk to each other. This concept of a workspace. So components that can be brought together in a meaningful way, and you allow the user to self-organize. So maybe I have a workspace that I use for managing my bond portfolios or for certain types of trades that I'm doing, right? Maybe I have a workspace for compliance, and they may all interoperate with each other, but at any given point, I need those components to be organized, right? So this concept of bringing them together in a meaningful way and letting the user do that, right? And then within these components, as we were talking about earlier across the enterprise, that's where we also have interoperability. You can have interoperability between data and components within a workspace. You can have interoperability between workspaces. It could be via API, it could be via URL. If you're using a tool like OpenFin, you can set different channels, and Sebastian will get a little bit more into the technology in a minute, but you can set up how these different components and different workspaces talk to each other and the data that they share. And we democratize that and we put it in the hands of the user and help them get organized. So going a level down now, if you drill into one of these workspaces, we'll get into the components here in a second. So just a reminder that these workspaces and bringing them together with the components are all made possible by kind of liberating the data, the information, and then ensuring that you have interoperability between them. So now let's look at a couple of components that rely on that kind of a support system underneath. So we saw these in a couple of the scenarios that we walked through, right? When we talked about Shore Factory and getting unstuck. So some common components are a good notification component. And typically what users want here is they want something, they don't want to have 5 different notification components, right? They ideally want one thing that they can set up that is going to interoperate across, if they're managing portfolios, if they're looking at portfolios and compliance and a blotter, and they want to see across that ecosystem, right? For all the things that they need to look at in doing whatever it is their main tasks are and that they have access to, right? So think about it in terms of aggregates, right? Similarly, different kind of the KPI component over here that we looked at, still an aggregation, a little different than a typical notification center, but again, something very helpful that could live, on their desktop, outside of a dashboard. We don't need to fire up a full dashboard or even a full workspace. We could have these individual components in a workspace. We can have them hang out all day long, where I have an eye constantly on my cache and I have an eye constantly on what notifications are coming in across my workspaces and across that ecosystem. And another example, so within any individual component, here we're looking at a data grid specifically, but being able to interoperate in context, very powerful. And that's another thing that you can do with this composable approach, saying, all right, well, I want a grid, and I would like to expose in my grid any holding that, in this case compliance, any holding that has been on a downward testing failure trend for the last 7 days. I want a flag to appear on that, right? In the context of the other work that I'm doing, rebalancing my portfolio, initiating a trade ticket, whatever it is, in context, I can see that information, right? And here in context, taking an action, right? Why do I have to go to a different app or a different location in order to start a transaction? In this case here, being able to modify right there in context and have that grid that might be for a portfolio manager interoperating with a blotter or a system where trade tickets are being created, right, and initiated. So it's those types of in context, interoperable in context actions. So it's not just about being able to see the data, but also being able to interoperate on the actions as well, and giving the user the power to some degree be able to configure that, making it available and for them to say what they'd like to see as an alert in that context and what types of, if there's 10 different actions available, which ones would they like to be able to do in that context? Well, I'd like to be able to rebalance here. I'd like to be able to initiate a trade ticket here. Now, there might still be 20 other steps that need to happen, right, for that trade ticket to be approved and compliant and all those good things. But right there, as I'm going through trying to rebalance, I don't have to, I don't need to have 10 different steps to create those tickets, right? So chore factory, check, gone. I can be very efficient and do it right there in context. And then the last pattern that we want to look at here is searching. And so again, if you can liberate your data and the logic and be able to move across different sources, very powerful and very time saving for a user to now not have to go into each previously Excel sheet or blotter or portfolio and search for something. Right here, we're fully interoperable. I'm looking for Apple. Well, what are you looking for? Are you looking for Apple, the equity? Are you looking for bonds? Are you looking for a particular holding, a particular entity, right? Right there, boom, search across everything. Very powerful, very important, huge time saver for users as well. And this little component we've seen over and over again. Really, it's kind of the holy grail of what people want to see when they have you give them the capability to have the data and have different apps, both legacy and modern, interoperate, being able to quickly get an aggregate view when you're looking for something. Users waste a lot of time kind of poking around in those super grids and other things, looking for things, where one nice integrated search can do that for them and be very powerful.
It's a good example of we say, take it apart and let your users put it together. And that may be true because when I'm trading, I want to see quotes and intelligence. And when I'm reconciling, I don't need, today's quotes. I could have very different arrangements, but they couldn't build search themselves. There's opportunities for us to do this within our suites or even across multiple applications, like open a trade order from your holdings grid. I may not write the OMS, but maybe I can throw a message out there that the OMS can start a trade ticket with. I can help search across the whole application, and that gives the users the power to put things back together again in ways that they couldn't by themselves.
That's right.
So let's see, let's talk a little bit about how that might work. I mean, search is a great example. So, that sounds good, but where's the data coming from? So going to talk just a little bit about some of the approaches we've seen to treating data as components, not just the user interface and the tasks as components. And as usual, I'll remind you of one of the best data aggregators in the business. Many of us only have a competitive product out there or an important enterprise product because someone couldn't get the basic job done in Excel. Remember, this is who you're always competing with, and this lets users do all kinds of things. Configure not just their data, but their whole workflow the way they want. Well, one important note, I think, is that in a way, the primacy of Excel is starting to fade. Don't worry, it's never going to go anywhere. But I've even talked to people, my age, in my 40s, people in their 50s saying, gosh, the kids coming in now to this industry don't know Excel as well as I used to. Isn't that surprising, right? Isn't everything in Excel? Well, part of that's because the proliferation of great applications designed like we're talking about here that are more fit for purpose. But it's also because consumers of data are using more sophisticated tools than just Excel, right? In the last 10 years, 5 years, we've seen a real revolution in the availability of BI tools, right? So if someone has gone to the trouble of making nice data marts, data lakes, data warehouses, I don't just have to look at them in Excel. I can actually do more sophisticated reporting and intelligence inside, Power BI, Tableau, Snowflake. A lot of people are coming out of university not as programmers ready to build your production app, but not scared of Python, or a notebook where they're writing some JavaScript and happy to go do some of the analysis themselves using kind of this different notebook type paradigm. We've built notebooks as kind of shared data environments into some applications where people wouldn't want to mess with Excel. Yeah, give it to me in Python and I'll plot it out. And so there, sometimes the components are not about shared data, like in the BI or Excel case, but about shared UI and visualization components that can be embedded in those notebooks. And I suspect we're going to see a lot more of this, right? Historically on Wall Street, to be a quant, you needed to know the calculus and be willing to write C++ and get down in the weeds. And that stuff is becoming more and more available, both as libraries are standardized and as sort of interactive and research-friendly workflows are being enabled through notebook type technology. Interesting people to watch here, a company called CurveNote, making really interesting interactive notebooks, just like Google Docs can be interactive. And then finally, they might be consuming their data here on the right side of this slide as a really sophisticated, unified experience, like we've been talking about designing here. So I think it's important to think of people consuming your data on lots of different levels. Often when you say data, people assume, right, a database or an API, and let's make that happen. But from an application building, from a UX perspective, you also need to think about designing not just for the right, your custom application, but for these other kinds of data consumption platforms, these other components that help people do their own analysis and workflow. A little bit on how we've seen in our projects this data get integrated as components. So if I've chopped my data up into pieces and now I'm willing to give it back to someone, they can go put it together in Excel, Power BI, right? Maybe my application. And what we talked a lot about in the early part of this presentation was really shared context. So that's what's underlying a lot of the shared windowing and shared components and workspaces that we talked about. Meaning, if I'm in my portfolio view and I click on this holding, could another application, a FactSet, for instance, bring up a quote and some intelligence for that particular QSIP? Those applications aren't really doing much with each other. They're not very heavily shared, but they're at least able to share a context of, hey guys, right now we're looking at this QSIP. What do you have to say about it? And so by allowing the different applications either in your suite or that you're integrating with on like an FTC3 desktop to share context, you're helping the user do what they want to do. That's kind of table stakes. That's the first step a lot of people are taking. What you then see next is applications wanting to share data, not just at a context, but about things that have happened. So for instance, I don't need to have a full-fledged integration with that OMS in order to package up a trade idea and send it over. Hey, we want to rebalance our equities by selling X dollars of this position. How do you want to sell it? When, market, limits, offsetting swaps, FX involvement. There could be all kinds of excitement when it comes time to really write the trade ticket, but I could communicate a message. Similarly, that system may communicate back that a trade has occurred, and I don't need to be able to model the trade or calculate the P&L for it, but that may be the trigger I need as an application to refresh my view and show the updated set of holdings. And so applications that embrace sending meaningful messages about what they are doing and what has happened allow them to integrate in a way that's sort of one level deeper than just let's rearrange our windows. A third area that we think is ripe for expansion in this space is what I call a shared canvas. So if I got 6 apps on my desk and they're all implementing a chart, isn't that kind of irritating that I've got 6 charts? Wouldn't it be nice if multiple of those applications could print their data, as it were, to the same chart? Okay, I've got one app showing me corporate actions. I've got one app showing me fund flows. I've got another app showing me, advanced analytics on pricing, for instance, of those issues. Couldn't I just see them all on one chart? couldn't I see them all on one grid? And this is actually an area where next month we're going to be talking a little bit about some components that we're releasing as Expero to make this easier. But certainly within your own application suite, I think you can think about not having your operational application need to be the sole owner of all the possible reporting and data viewing that needs to go on. You're going to have important specialized views, but are there ways you can share a lot of your data out to a component? The easiest one to think of, again, is Excel, but to some components that may be specialized around some of the instruments, specialized information. You look at FX, different than bonds, different than swaps, different than equities. To share that data into one place and allow the user to control it, right? Oh, I need to look at 6 months of data. I need to pull this, and this here. Things that you didn't know they wanted to do, but they did. Put it on a shared canvas, which again, grids, charts, notebooks. And then of course, finally, in some ways, the hardest to do is to actually integrate the data. So some people call these like a book of record if they're meant to be used operationally. Sometimes it's just a data warehouse. One of the good things about the BI revolution is that people are attacking this slide from both ends, top and bottom. People are putting together data warehouses that have, synthesized, unified views of data across the enterprise, but they're still kind of early days, in my opinion, for a lot of it, or they're being approached in a very monolithic way. Yes, buy Aladdin and you can put it all in here. Well, that's fine if you can afford an Aladdin and if you're that complicated, but there's a lot of smaller workflows and smaller shops that struggle to put this shared data together, and that's another obvious way that we see these applications integrating. So, in conclusion, if I want to talk about from the data side what some of the rules of modernization are, I'll say if we're delivering our formerly kind of big sovereign monolithic applications as smaller reusable components, that implies on the data that people may want to see that stuff, not just in my application. If I'm publishing a bunch of great analytics, that's cool that I volunteered to show it to you in a chart, but maybe you want it in your notebook to combine with your proprietary models to put together your trading strategy. Maybe that's great that I have a bespoke application for the 50 people that do this day in and day out, but for the 4 analysts, can you just give me an API or a data lake? And so we're talking about some of the same data, same processes, same analytics, but supported in lots of different ways, which includes taking in data from other applications as if it's first class with yours. So let's see, you have a pricing service. Can you integrate someone else's pricing service? Is that front of your mind as you modernize your platform? Or if you can calculate analytics, can you do it off of other people's base data? Or are you willing to share those answers out for the next guy's common chart? Mix and match as much as you can so that in this case, not just the users can choose their own adventure, but the integrators, the application builders, and potentially even the analysts can put their data back together again. So with that, we're going to conclude. As a reminder, what we think the message is, if you're trying to modernize, is first, take it all apart. And that doesn't just mean drawing boxes around all the UI widgets that are in your application. It means taking it apart from a program, user experience and technology level. Let your users put it back together again around workspaces and messaging, but also help them put it back together again around specifically integrated workflows, action and context, search, and ultimately with your data and your UI sharing, cooperate to compete because your users are doing it anyway. Let's help them out. All right, thanks everyone. If there's any questions, be happy to answer them here. I guess you could chat any of us directly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lynn and Sebastian. We will go ahead and start Q&A. You can drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom meeting, or feel free to chat the panelists. We did have a couple that came through. The first one, what does a typical modernization program look like for you guys?
Wow, if only there was a typical modernization program. Here's what I'll say. Almost everyone that wants to modernize has a proof of concept that they want to try first. They've looked at a bunch of concepts like this. They've got an existing application that's maybe it's costing them sales because it's slow and they have a tech puzzle to unwrap, or it's costing them sales because it's ugly, or at least out of fashion. And they need something concrete to show proof of concept around some of these componentized or more modern UX expectations, or a proof of concept around a data improvement that needs to happen. So I think the truth is every modernization journey is different, but in our experience, they all start with something small that you're trying to prove. So we do that analysis around program objectives, technology objectives, UX objectives. And typically we find a 2 to 3 month project that bundles all that up to say, look, here's an idea. It's sellable to your customers or your management to get funding. It illustrates some technical hurdles that may have needed to be reached in terms of reusing legacy applications or faster, smarter, better calculations or integrations. And the art of doing that initial proof of concept helps pull those 3 tracks, program, UX, and technology together so that you end up with a better program. Hey, having tried this and seen what it looks like, now we can see kind of what the next year of there or 6 months or whatever of this program looks like. You have any thoughts on that, Lynn?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think I guess the other layer I'll add there is we're always doing things in an incremental way. When you start to take these systems apart before you can put them back together, it's like peeling back the onion. You learn, you think you know some things, you dig in, and then all of a sudden, oh, well, there's that code. Nobody's touched that in years. What does that do? That's interesting, right? So also be aware that you may, plot a program and then that might change as you start to peel back the onion, and you do, incrementally, you got to, sometimes go back to, oh, now we're back in a little bit more of experimentation land. We need to do another POC, or we need to do, some experimenting here to understand how to make this better. So don't be afraid of experimentation. I would say, maybe that's a detail in your program, right? Because that's the reality of some of what you're dealing with, right? Being able to make those adjustments.
Yeah, I'll say that before we do the next question, that the successful modernization programs usually end up admitting that the modernization effort is a race with the legacy product. And I often like to say you can't add 2 bedrooms to your house by working on Saturday afternoons. Like, you have to set aside a chunk of time and a chunk of dollars to go do that larger effort. The best way to make a modernization fail is to poke at it with small POCs and poke at it with incremental improvements. That's for sure. Oh, Laura, did you say there was another question?
Yeah, it looks like we had one more that came through. How can we best mitigate transitioning between legacy UI and new UX for our users?
I'll take a stab at that if you want, Sebastian.
Yeah,
you can follow on. So I guess it's kind of a continuation of what we were just talking about with the program. And I'll say, as part of your strategy, you really need to be thinking about that user experience as well with the program, right? So it's again, easy to get mired in the technology and what things are going to the cloud and what code needs to be rewritten and updated and where we need to create APIs and all these good things. But when you're thinking about the experience and tearing that down and figuring that out, thinking about, which pieces are we going to leave behind? We're going to totally modernize. Which pieces, if any, do we need to keep forever, or maybe some period of time, right? Like acknowledging in the program, what does it look like for how long do we have to live with this kind of bifurcated experience where maybe the user has to be aware that they're in a legacy experience and then some pieces of it are in a new experience, right? And you have to really plan for that in your program and think about that and be honest about it up front. It's okay. It's okay if things like aren't perfect for a while. Like, everybody has this vision of, oh, we're going to roll out this entire shiny new modernization, modernized experience. It doesn't really work like that. So the best we could do is plan for it and then also be smart about it. So, we talked about just a couple of different scenarios here. Like, think like your users and the types of tasks that they're doing, right? So, and the fancy term for that might be value stream to the user, right? So, but what are the kinds of workflows that they think about? And so how can you maybe logically group those things in your roadmap, in your program, right? So for example, maybe you say, okay, we're going to modernize our blotter, and we're going to this front office. We're going to modernize our blotter. And we can't modernize all of the different workflows and things for all of the different instruments that people are trading. But, we could pick one to start with, and that's going to be our value stream. So we're going to have blotter and we're going to have bonds. And that experience is going to be great from the time that we place a trade ticket from comes in from our OMS to I adjust it, I get it, I get it in there, I get it filled, and now I'm tracking it through settlement and that the blotter, and all that is going to be great. But you know what? What we're not going to do, unfortunately, right now is all of our other fixed income instruments. Those are going to roll out over time. Bond experience, totally new. Other fixed income, that's still going to be legacy, or maybe it starts with the new blotter, but then all of the steps along the way, all of the trading details that need to be filled in, and those forms, and the approval process, and all that stuff, that's still going to be legacy. And so now we have a clear value prop for the user. They go, wow, this end-to-end cycle was amazing. Can't wait till you have it for other
Right.
other fixed income, right? And it's clear. It's not, well, we picked this form because that was easy to update, and we picked this other form, and it's this very sort of weird experience that can be disorienting to users. It's like getting thrashed back and forth between legacy, and you're going to click a button and you don't know what's going to happen next. Am I going to be back in legacy? Am I going to be in my modern experience? And if you try to take a component approach with that, it's even worse, right? So if you can identify some nice, end-to-end workflows, value streams to the user,
Right.
and that has to align with your tech program, right? And cue Sebastian to speak to what's technically feasible, right? And getting that alignment going. But that's one approach for that. And Sebastian,
it's like LaGuardia. You can't fix it all at once, but you can make one really nice new terminal. And if you fly on United or Southwest, it shows you that the future can be possible. And unfortunately, if you fly Delta, there's still water leaking from the ceilings, but at least you made the new terminal, and you can have your Shake Shack on the way out. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Hope we hear from you soon. Thanks.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.